Hello, tech friends, and thank you for tuning into Emerging Technologies in Business, where we take a deep dive into different technologies that are impacting businesses today and in the very near future. I'm your host, Brock Riney, and this podcast is brought to you by Kincannon XR. Let's talk tech. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Emerging Technologies in Business. I am absolutely excited for today's episode. I'm joined from Matt. He's the head of product for Varjo Reality Cloud. It's probably one of the coolest things that's hitting the VR and XR world. It's going to be starting first on their VR3 and XR3 headsets, but eventually it's going to be on phones, tablets, anything in the world, and it's really going to change how the world of VR and XR are making real-time reality sharing possible for really the first time. So, Matt, thank you for taking the time out to talk to me today. I'm super excited to hear all the fun stuff about Varjo that I don't know. I only know this much of it, but I know you guys just announced that you have launched the Varjo Reality Cloud. Do you mind jumping into that and giving myself and the listeners a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about there?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Brock. I'm very happy to join this podcast. Secondly, yes, you're right. We have officially launched Varjo Reality Cloud about a month ago at this point. It's still a fairly new product, but then it's the one with some traction. In essence, Varjo Reality Cloud is just means to an end. It's a way of running eventually all of the usual virtual reality enterprise software, but from off the cloud. And in this way, as I might have been saying, doing demos of Varjo Reality Cloud sometimes is the most uneventful type of doing demos, because some of the customers, they get out of those demos with, but what was so special about it, and usually what was so special was that the demo was being run not from off the $20,000 workstation, but from off like a $1,500 or euros or pounds, depending on where you are, laptops. In all of the other ways, we try to make the user experience as simple and as trivial and as similar to the original one of the kind of the on-prem setup as possible.
So long term, I know right now you're utilizing it on the headsets that you have. Mm-hmm. How long do you think it'll be until you start utilizing the Reality Cloud on things like a cell phone or a laptop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't give you the exact date, but of course we want to make it to as soon as possible. I think that it would also make sense to give a little bit of a voiceover to why the hell have we started with our own hardware and with our own headsets as opposed to something else. Technically, we could have started off with supporting the third-party headsets or Android phones or tablets or any of those. There's a good reason, though, for starting off with our own headsets, apart from, supporting the headset sales as well. When it comes to technology and hardware itself, we're a little bit ahead of most of the competition, and there's a lot of micro technologies in the back end and microservices, especially when it comes to advanced mixed reality, that we have and that many of our competitors don't have, and that many of the popular in the market SDKs don't support. So unless we do that, no one does. And one of the reasons for why the clients are buying our headsets is because of their quality. So again, we need to make a first step there to make sure that there is a cloud solution out there that supports the full range of backend technologies, especially when it comes to advanced mixed reality. Going back to your original question, yes, at some point we will support cell phones, tablets, Android-based headsets, probably some of the competitors' headsets, but I'm probably not ready to share the exact date right now.
Yeah, of course, that makes sense. But even speaking to your headsets and how high quality they are, can you tell me a little bit about the bionic display and your overly amazing accurate eye tracker and how that makes a big difference to what your headsets can do?
Yeah, let's take the eye tracking as an example. There's this fairly interesting to explain and interesting to present as well concept called foveated rendering that the eye tracking is super helpful for. Basically, foveated rendering is a fancy way of saying that there's a display within a display that moves around, and this display within a display that moves around following your eye gaze has a way higher resolution than the rest of the periphery of the display. And the reason for why it's a very cool technology is because, first of all, when you segregate and separate the internal areas of the display like that, you don't really lose anything to the overall perception, if anything, you only gain because our eyes, they don't really register stuff that's happening in the periphery with a super high resolution. So there's actually no point in having the super high resolution at the periphery. And then by segregating the screen like that and having the concentrated super high resolution where you're actually looking and the slightly lower resolution everywhere else, you're also optimizing the bandwidth. So in the end, you could get the picture quality, a fairly high picture quality with the relatively lower bandwidth requirements and kind of the easier ways of meeting all of the latency SLA. So that's one super cool technology. And theoretically, I think one of the experiments that we tried running was Netflix, and watching Netflix with super low bandwidth, which you could do with a surprisingly low bandwidth requirements and super high resolution, just because of having this concentrated field of view.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I read about Varjo is that the Reality Cloud is actually a lower bit rate than streaming a true Netflix movie, right?
Well, I won't be able to speak to the bit rate, but foveated rendering is one of the technologies that helps us optimize for the bandwidth. I would imagine that when it comes to the actual bandwidth, I haven't looked up the Netflix requirements in a while. We would still be a little bit above them. So the way we've been putting it in our recommended requirements is that you'd need the 30 megabits of bandwidth for the virtual reality mode, and then 50 megabits for the mixed reality mode, which is, I would imagine that that's higher what Netflix requires, but that's also within the range of what your typical office environment would present, at least in Europe. And it's even within the range of what the 5G mobile tethering could give you again in Europe. One of the things that I did have to do a few weeks back when I was doing a demo at a client site where there's something wrong with the guest Wi-Fi, was literally just hooking up the laptop to my iPhone and streaming from off it, and it worked with a simple model, but it worked, and that speaks to the more practical bandwidth requirements. I think in a way it gives you a feeling of what they are.
Absolutely, like that's an incredibly low requirement for something that's so complex. Would you mind talking through a little bit about virtual transportation or teleportation? Because I think that's going to be one of the biggest things and the coolest thing that's going to change the world that we live in now. Because of the low bandwidth requirements, having the ability for someone to enter your real life working space and share that, I just think is very interesting. I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I have to admit that that's not my specialty. This is a product line that we have in parallel with the Varjo Reality Cloud, but that's a very interesting product line. At the super high level, I'd say that I think that all of us, especially in the post-COVID world, are acknowledging that there is now a lot more room for remote work and for remote collaboration. And so far, we've been doing it via the Zooms and Teams of this world. Facebook has now started pumping billions or tens of billions, and not sure what the exact budgets are, a lot of money into the more virtual reality based collaboration. I think that the interesting difference to point out there is that we have a way higher resolution, higher fidelity hardware, and differently to Facebook, that at least in all the demo materials is presenting those cartoonish looking avatars and not too realistic looking spaces and whatnot, at least at this point. Our initial vision is that we want the thing to look real. We don't want the cartoonish avatars. We don't want the cartoonish looking workspace. We want the whole thing to look real, to give the higher fidelity, closer to reality experience eventually.
Well, I think that's what really separates Varjo to everybody else is how quickly everything can be rendered because of the low requirements for bandwidth, but also how high fidelity everything is, because the higher everything is in fidelity wise and shading, the more computing power you typically need. So you're solving both answers at the exact same time. So it's giving the most realistic look for recreation of our natural reality that I've ever seen. And it's just going to continue to get more and more intense and more where is this really the life that we're going to be living going forward? Is it truly going to be the Ready Player One aspect of, hey, completely different world that we're living in now? And I'm super excited to see it. Matt, was there anything that I didn't cover that you wanted to speak to as far as Varjo that I just may have missed or didn't ask you a question on?
By way of the general company introduction, probably not. You've covered all the right basics. From my personal standpoint, what I did want to mention is that probably quite unexpectedly, especially for someone who's based in the U.S. or in Western Europe, Varjo is originally a Finnish company. Now we've started hiring all across the globe, but it's originally a Finnish company, and they had offices there, and most of the founding engineers and members are from there. This is a very unexpected thing, especially for someone like myself who's mostly worked for the American tech companies throughout my whole life, to see such a technology emerging from such a not well-known place. But somehow it did happen, and I think that's a very remarkable fact that some of the people are missing. This far forefront technology in terms of both hardware and hopefully with to some extent my help software is emerging from this kind of remote end of Europe.
I think that's awesome. And, well, it's going to be a game changer. It already is. The further and further it gets implemented into different devices across the world, I just see Varjo being a leader in the industry and really kind of changing the game completely and going by a whole new set of rules that everyone probably should have looked at a long time ago. But I'm glad that we have it now. Is there anywhere that we could reach out to you, or how can we get in contact with you via social media, or what's the best way to reach out to Varjo?
Yeah, sure. I'm fairly open on LinkedIn. You could find me at Matt's Product LinkedIn. That's literally my handle there, Matt-Product or Mat Zagaynov. I usually, with a little bit of a delay, reply to all the requests. And then when it comes to Varjo, generally speaking, there's this wonderful talk to sales button on the website. There's also someone on the receiving end that would be probably the second best way of reaching out, especially if you were considering being a client.
Really appreciate that. Matt, thank you for the time. I really do appreciate you sharing a little bit of insight for us today. And I also want to thank all of our listeners at home. If you liked our content today, give us a like. Feel free to subscribe. You can also find us on social media as well. You can search for us at ETIB Podcast or at KingCannonXR. I've been your host, Brock Riney. Matt, thank you again for your time. Cannot wait to see what's coming next for Varjo. And we will talk some more emerging tech next time.